In this section, we're going to discuss how sex addiction might actually show up in the day-to-day. Again, most of these behaviors on their own are not necessarily healthy or unhealthy addiction or not addiction. So we'll talk about how it might actually show up, boots on the ground activities, and then you can take that and compare it with that list of criteria to decide if your behavior is indeed sex addiction. One of the strangest parts for folks with sex addiction is that it doesn't necessarily have to include physical sex or any physical or direct interactions. It can show up just mentally as fantasy. Engaging in fantasy can be a way sex addiction shows up. That can also be pornography, where, of course, we're not directly engaging with another person, but we are indeed using images to alter our state. That can be addiction. Voyeurism is an area this can show up in. Voyeurism is watching someone else for sexual pleasure. It can be exhibitionism, showing yourself to others for sexual pleasure. That might be in a matter of how you dress. It could be actually exposing your body or parts of your bodies to others without them asking you to do that, or even if they are, again, bring it back to that list of criteria. It can be cruising or heading out to different areas for the purposes of finding a sexual partner. Again, not necessarily unhealthy or addiction, but it can be. There can also be ways of engaging with sex that are really using it to your advantage. So that might be exchanging sex for money or paying money for sex, having some exchange. There can be a power dynamic to it. So using your position of power to get sex from someone, or using sex as your position of power. It can be a conquest. So looking at someone like prey and interacting with them in a way where you are attempting to be victorious over them sexually. That can be a way that this shows up. Can be phone sex, either actually talking with a person one-on-one or exchanging messages from someone. That can or doesn't necessarily have to include payment. It can include using other substances in order to alter your sexual experience. So using drugs or alcohol, either to alter your own state or to alter the state of someone else to lower inhibitions or even bring them into that unconscious state, which again is not true consent. And just we'll refer back to that conversation, as that is never okay. It might be producing your own pornography, whether that's videos or images. It might be intrusive sex, so bringing sexual jokes or commentary into conversations. It might be just having that as a general form of communication style, which maybe sounds funny to you, but some of us did indeed go about that way in the world. One of the biggest areas of confusion for folks is masturbation. Yes, masturbation can indeed be a way that sex addiction shows up. Again, not necessarily unhealthy in its own right. And again, we're not talking morals on any of this stuff. To each their own, I always say, so long as there's conscious choice happening and it is indeed healthy. So people would often say, like, everybody masturbates. What's the big deal? So the difference might be masturbating for 10 minutes versus 10 hours and actually causing harm to yourself. So the act of on its own isn't necessarily a negative thing, but if it's causing you harm, any of these areas, then that is definitely worth looking into with regard to sex addiction. It could also include, and this one's really tough for people, this is the one that nobody wants to hear or look at. You can engage in active sex addiction with your monogamous partner or spouse. We often think that because we are connected in a conventionally accepted way, that means we can't act out with that person. That's not true. It is not uncommon for a person with sex addiction to use their partner, whether that's a significant other in a more casual form or a marriage or a domestic partnership or whatever it might be, in order to act out. I know that might feel gross, but it does happen. And that can also be sex addiction. Really, anything in the sexual realm, anything on that spectrum, whether it's actually engaging with another person or persons, or never touching or talking to someone, if it has to do with sex and sexuality, it can show up in active sex addiction. Whatever spot you're on that spectrum, if it feels outside of your integrity, outside of your values, outside of your control, take it over to that list of criteria and see if it fits. If it does, then that very likely could be active sex addiction. If it doesn't, but it's moving in that direction, also worth looking into. And if it doesn't fit that criteria at all, then openly explore that. What feels right for you? I'll leave you on that to do that on your own, and we'll keep it to the basics here of what sex addiction really is and isn't, and where it comes from, and how we handle it moving forward. And that's where we are going to go next. I'll see you in there.